Hello, everyone. I hope the often busy end of the year is going well for y'all. I haven't had as much time and energy to write recently, and especially not to make videos, but I really wanted to do something Christmassy. So I have done an in-depth analysis and discussion about the subject of one of my Christmas viewing traditions, Grinch's Ultimatum by Pilot Red Sun. I'm a big fan of what he created on that channel, and to me, this is his magnum opus. His work very much straddles the line between shitpost and surreal, like legitimate surrealism, but I feel Grinch's Ultimatum truly is surrealist art. It is an amazing video that gives you thoughts and feelings that are very hard to describe, but still recognizable and powerful. I'm here today to do my best to put my feelings into words, giving my own thoughts and discussing what interpretations on greater topics we can take away from this video. When you really take the time to process it, there is a lot to take away from this just under 2 minute long video. So in the description, I've linked Grinch's Ultimatum if you haven't seen it already, and an extended version of the BGM that's used in the video. I highly recommend watching the original video if you haven't rewatched it recently, or if you haven't watched it at all, please give it a view. I wrote this with the assumption that you have watched that video, and also consider listening to the extended BGM while you're listening to this. I'm intentionally not putting in background music. Listening to it really helped me get deep in thought while writing. So I'll start off going through the video chronologically, talking about what comes to mind for me as we go along. Then I'll get into the bigger ideas that this video inspired me to consider. As must be said, these are just my opinions and do not make up the entirety of what you can take away from this video. I'm not insisting you have to view this video as anything more than just a funny video. It's fine if you think I'm reading too much into this. But I believe that this video is both funny and deeply thought-provoking. With this piece, I am enjoying just letting pretty much all of my thoughts and considerations out. I hope you all enjoyed my ramblings here, that I did my best to make cohesive and more definitive, understandable, etc. And I will be discussing some serious topics and opinions here that can be considered under the political spectrum. So just so that is aware for everyone. But I can't be true to myself and what I see in this video without talking about that kind of stuff. And just because I bring up a perspective here does not automatically mean I personally have that perspective. These are very broad topics that have a lot of different room for interpreting and having your own personal philosophies and stuff like that. But I'm just giving my opinions and bringing up different ways that people could see this, not just one specific way that I interpreted this video. Though I'm pretty explicit when I do have some of these opinions that I talk about, and what I think is like the main through line that I personally see in the video and have enjoyed thinking about. So we start out with the perspective character holding a remote, one hand repeatedly moving around above the remote. This shows that the character is thoroughly unsure of something. He doesn't know what buttons to press. Based on what comes later, this can mean that he is unsure of himself and what he should do. We then cut to an outside view of his house. The roof is very lopsided rather than even, just like he is lopsided towards being a Grinch. The TV antenna on the roof represents the coming conflict. It is pushed to one side a few times by the wind, which could be foreshadowing that he ultimately ends up on that one side of the binary. But while the wind sways it, it still ends up staying straight before we transition back inside, which is showing that a choice has not actually been made yet. The quote-unquote choice comes later. The TV antenna being a representation of the character's mental state also fits with how I interpret the TV. Next, we see him fiddling with his TV with an annoyed look on his face. The color on the TV is going back and forth between primarily black or white. Black and white being a commonly used binary. Binaries are an important theme here that I will be discussing heavily. He's trying to change the channel. He wants to change what he's seeing on the TV, but nothing he does makes that happen. This makes you think that he is a person who is struggling to change. Coming back to the remote, that could be something that is capable of causing change in him because you use a remote to activate and do things on a TV. But he's unsure of how to use it. And moving on, there's a figure on the screen of the TV, but it's unclear who it is. I see this as him, the perspective character. He is unsure of himself, so he doesn't know who he truly is. He doesn't like what he sees. This inner turmoil frustrates him, which is why he hits the TV until it's broken. His sense of self, if we see the TV as him, is broken. He breaks the TV to resist facing this insecurity. And there's a goat noise played when the TV breaks. Honestly, I couldn't come up with any firm meaning to this. It could simply be a funny noise for the sake of enhancing the sudden destruction of the TV. Yeah, just because I believe this video was made with deeper meaning in mind, which I very much do, does not mean every single little detail has to be intended for serious contemplation. It could just be a funny noise. Maybe it was meant to represent how extreme his feelings are and how he's acting in this particular scene. And now we go back to the roof for Santa's entrance. Santa walks over the roof with after images. Then it cuts to a rotating image of Santa with text of its claws. I've had a bit more trouble with this scene too. Perhaps the after images represents how Santa goes across roofs repeatedly while delivering presents around the world. And it could represent that the prospective character, has had this scene play in his head multiple times. Santa comes out of the chimney inside, which has fire drawn in it, along with sound effects for fire during the time Santa is moving. There is a deliberate sound for the fire only during that moment of him moving. I think this is intended to be picked up on, which implies that there is meant to be meaning here. Santa traditionally moves inside the house through chimneys, but the fire is never lit when he enters a house, because that brings up the idea of whether he could get hurt. Here, that doesn't matter. Santa moves inside through the lit fireplace. So now we can bring up the idea of whether what we see here from here on is meant to be literal or figurative for the character. Talking about like the magical kind of stuff. Santa moving through the fire without issue can imply that the Santa he sees here is not actually real. Everything with Santa could just be in the character's head, being a visual representation of how he is processing his feelings towards himself, and outside stimulus as well. Or it could be that Santa is real and is an actual magical being, so he doesn't care about the fire. Another could be that Santa coming out of the fire is like how a demon can walk through hellfire, and that could even be as a visual of him coming out of hell, which could represent him as a negative influence rather than a positive one, which to me can fit with what we see from Santa and how I see that he pushes a binary. The character, now holding a baseball bat, loudly says "what" upon seeing Santa. Him holding the baseball bat while looking at the TV makes it seem like he was going to continue damaging the TV. This further shows his self-hatred, and could go as far as to represent legitimate self-harm, since this is a step above using his fist on the TV, which, as I previously stated, the TV can represent himself. Upon witnessing this, Santa gets a gleam in his eye, and to me has a smug look. This could be because Santa has already pegged him as a Grinch from this response alone. From this perspective, we could say that Santa saw a mere moment of this guy's life and already decided, oh, he's a Grinch. He's a Grinch forever. Or it could play into the all-seeing nature of Santa, with him seeing these actions himself in person, just validating the preconceived notion that he already had. Because Santa, he sees you when you're sleeping, blah blah blah. But regardless, to me, this look does not fit the saintly, good-natured persona he usually has, and I'll be bringing this up again later. Now to the meat of the video. Santa talks directly to the character, telling him he has a choice between being a Grinch or a saint. This is a binary based around morality, putting people into just two camps. Grinch and saint, being spelled wrong, could represent that the binary being presented is illegitimate. And Santa's insistence on this choice, because he's very insistent in the scene, could represent how this binary is forcefully pushed onto people. Or it could just be because the way Santa talks is really funny. Seriously though, this part of the video is genuinely super funny. With his speech finished, Santa disappears with a smile, which again I interpret as smug. This brings us back to the point that this version of Santa, to me, doesn't seem like a good person. We don't see him that much, but that's just the feeling that I get from it. He presents what I feel to be a dehumanizing binary with a self-satisfied look. Santa disappearing could represent how this may all be in the character's head again. This is just him processing his thoughts about himself and society. Santa represents society forcing a binary through labels, which we will then use to make assumptions and generalizations about a person's character. And so once Santa disappears, only about a second later, the character turns into a Grinch, styled after the design by Dr. Seuss. The character has visually become a Grinch. What has actually happened here is firmly intended to be up to the eye of the beholder. Why did he change? Was it because he decided for himself that he was a Grinch? Or did he change because Santa decided he was one? Did magic physically change his body for real? Or did he not actually change? Again, is this just metaphorical? If we follow the track that everything magical we see is metaphorical, then this represents that he has made the choice to view himself as a Grinch. Or it could be that this did not come from his own agency. As I brought up previously, you could say that Santa wanted him to be a Grinch because that's how he viewed him. The character was labeled as a Grinch, so we, as the audience, along with the character and everyone else in the actual video, see him as a Grinch. Have I truly become a monster? Is what he asks himself, and is the core about what this video is about. Monster is a fitting word for the Grinch. The Grinch is treated like a monster in most interpretations, and he acts like a stereotypical depiction of one and has the design traits of one. But is he actually a monster? Has he changed since making a choice? Based on some of the previous things we see in the video, such as his anger early on and Santa's reaction, you could almost say that his transformation was predetermined in a way. Was he born a Grinch? Does how he looks define him? Is he suddenly a monster now that he is green and hairy? Is his disappearance what defines him as a monster rather than his behavior? How do all these things intersect? There's just like so many questions that you can ask. But moving on, the character then leaves his house. He sets up a boombox in a public place and starts dancing. This is the hardest thing to put into words. All I can really say is how it makes me feel, and that his dance is incredibly powerful. There's something so beautiful, sad, and euphoric about his dance, with all of these things emanating at the same time. And based on how you view things, you can look at things interpret the dance in a lot of different ways. People look his way as he dances, but their gaze generally doesn't stay for long. His face is not very expressive at the end, I think intentionally, so what he's feeling here is very much up to interpretation. But I've always got the feeling of sadness from it, that he's lonely. To me, his dance was his attempt to connect with people, because dance is very much an act of self-expression. Dancing is done by pretty much all living creatures, not just humans, usually as a means of attracting animals in the wider animal kingdom. Ultimately, he could be dancing to try to gain acceptance that he craves as a result of seemingly being turned into a monster. Then, the video ends with us being told that the tale of the Christmas Cretin ends there, with a variety of images appearing at the end that are mostly related to Christmas as a holiday. To me, the final words carry a lot of weight. They insist that his story is over, which means his fate is decided then and there. Apparently, he's a Grinch. Case closed. And that fits with this being an ultimatum, per the title. So I didn't talk about the music, so that brings us to the end of the video, but I didn't talk about the music. I wish I had a better vocabulary for expressing music. I just don't. I'm just not as proficient at putting it into words. So I left it for last in this section rather than starting with it. But the music is definitely a notable aspect of the video as well. Like with the dance, I can really only say how it makes me feel. It feels contemplative, which fits for a story about someone supposedly making a decision. The music also feels melancholic, which fits with how you can interpret his journey here as having positive and negative aspects to it. The music also fits with what happens over the course of the video. The soundtrack is very noisy early on, then a lot of the noise fades away once he transforms, but then when he dances, a lot of that noise returns. So, moving on to the more broader and more firm ideas that I take away from this video. I think it's very intentional. It is very intentional that I have not referred to the prospective character as a Grinch, even though it's called Grinch's Ultimatum, because I don't recognize the oversimplification of who this person is, and this really plays into how I interpret this video. In the traditional story of the Grinch, he starts out as the type of personality that we would consider someone to be Grinch-like. He's full of anger and jealousy, an outcast by choice from the town. These feelings spur his wrongful actions, like stealing all the Christmas decorations and presents. But by the end of the story, he changes. After seeing the joy people still have despite losing their possessions, his heart grows. He returns what he stole and is welcomed by the town that he initially wronged. The original story shows the Grinch changing from a traditionally bad person to a good one. But unlike in the original story of the Grinch, I don't see any opportunity for the character's heart to grow 3 sizes here. Here, his transformation into the Grinch is treated as a sense of finality. This could be Pilot Red Sun saying that the story of the Grinch sadly does not represent our own world. One topic we can discuss is the concept around Santa Claus. One of the more well-known and memorable aspects of Santa Claus is his lists. There is a naughty list and a nice list. Naughty versus nice. This is a binary, one centered around morality. You're a good person or a bad person, and you go on the respective list based on that. Santa decides whether people are moral or not, simplifying them into just 2 types of people, with the verses directly putting these people at odds with each other. Taking this moral binary higher would bring us to the concepts of heaven and hell, which hits on the Christian roots of Christmas and the characters born from it, like Santa Claus and the Grinch. In Grinch's Ultimatum, I feel Santa represents the unjust binaries around morality that we often see in our society, with the people pushing these restrictive beliefs onto people knowingly taking advantage of the influence they can have. Santa pushes his moral binary onto the main character. This is why he is shown with negative traits, like his labels being misspelled, and him seemingly, in a way, finding joy in presenting this choice and seeing the outcome. We don't truly choose what labels we have when they are given to us. People can act like we deserve our labels through our actions, but we can't always choose our actions or how other people interpret them through their own narrow viewpoint. In my opinion, morality is not something to be defined within a binary. How can you just be a saint or a Grinch, naughty or nice? These binaries remove the gray area in between each extreme. There is a broad spectrum of what can be considered right and wrong, based on the details of the situation at hand, philosophies, socioeconomic statuses, etc. And you can debate these things for hours. This binary also pushes labels, naughty versus nice, Grinch versus saint. These are also overgeneralizations, and are used to define people in as simple of a way as possible, which can be used to make someone's behavior and beliefs seem set in stone. That is the meaning behind the finality of this story. It's getting at how society gives you unjust labels that you're often stuck with. And with those labels comes assumptions, mistreatment, and not being accepted by greater society. And on the topic of society, we as the viewers could also represent society. We are seeing a limited perspective of this person and making our own judgments about what we are seeing and what type of person that he is. These moral binaries and labels can dismiss the capacity for change that people have. Entertainment media constantly presents the idea of people changing for the better, but oftentimes we also see characters who are shown to be incapable of change and are treated with scorn because of it. Through these themes, we can breach the topic of criminality and how we see this primarily in real life. Oftentimes, once someone is branded a criminal, that label can stick with them for life. Many assume they'll always commit more crimes. Once a criminal, always a criminal. This is a philosophy that I strongly condemn for how dehumanizing it is, and how it can be used to abuse targeted groups of people. We see this all the time, with political leaders and the media disparaging groups of people in a manner that fits their agendas. This philosophy also goes against what the original story of the Grinch is about. The Grinch commits crimes. He commits theft and breaking and entering, but by the end is welcomed in by the Whos that he previously wronged. They forgave him, and because of that, he is able to move forward positively. But in real life, things don't often work out that way. Many people are unable to shed their negative labels, and the pitfalls it puts in their way towards improvement will continue to hurt them. It can be very difficult for normal people who are convicted of crimes to return to normalcy. And I did say normal people on purpose, even if they do not commit any more crimes. Criminals are not always offered the proper chance for redemption that we see by good-natured characters in fiction, like your Supermans, Gokus, and most relevant to this, the Who's of Whoville in the original story of The Grinch. The negative effects of labels extend further than just criminality. Oftentimes in real life, labels are used to soothe conflict, like we can potentially say Santa is doing in Grinch's Ultimatum. The label of poor, for example, can brand someone as a criminal despite committing no crimes. And to take it into another direction, race is a topic that we can bring up here, as the physical appearance of the main character plays into the question of if he's a Grinch, a monster, or whatever. When it comes to race as a label, racists will consider the people they hate as bad by default. This plays into how Santa may have pegged the prospective character as a Grinch before the apparent choice was even made, meaning his choice may not have actually mattered, and that after he visually changes into a Grinch, people disregard him. But sometimes hateful people using labels, those types of people can consider someone to be one of the good ones. This is another oversimplification, is hypocritical and blah blah blah, but it loops back into the binary of good versus bad that's presented in Grinch's Ultimatum. The reason why people only look for like a short period of time as he dances is because they disregard him once they see him as a Grinch. Because of his label as a Grinch, and therefore being viewed on the negative end of the moral binary, he is discounted and not seen for the valid human that he is. His dance was his attempt to be viewed as a human being just like them, regardless of his physical appearance. And if we follow the sad interpretation of his reactions, then he did not get what he desired. And based on the finality posed at the end of the video, I think he never will. That's one way that we can interpret this overall story. And his transformation plays negatively into the insecurity he already had before transforming. Despite seemingly getting his definitive answer of who he is, because I brought up that he was unsure, in this case, getting his answer that he's apparently a Grinch, he still questions if he is really a monster. And this gets into the idea of the self and the human condition. We will never truly understand who we are. We are not static beings that can be simplified to very simple terms like these labels. Even if we're told that we're one thing or think that we are in a moment, that does not mean we're convinced that we're that, or that we need to adhere to whatever that is. We are not defined by any one trait, be it naughty, nice, Grinch, or saint. We should not give someone a negative label such as a Grinch and let that completely dictate how we view their story in its entirety. So going in a bit of a different direction, I've mostly spoken about this story being a very negative one, but there are some positive ways that we can view it. This story could also be about personal acceptance and liberation from society's pressures like I brought up before. This could be why I also feel that the music has a relaxing and upbeat side to it. This could be a story of someone who is unsure of himself coming to terms with who he is. He may be accepting that his actions bring him scorn and that he has to deal with the label that he's been given, but that he will be true to himself regardless. He won't let society's negative label stop him from expressing himself through his dance. He is who he is, not who society tells him he is. Dancing is a form of self-expression that you can say is truly unique to the individual. Dance is very often choreographed, and people dance in sync all the time. But freeform dance is truly unique to the individual in that moment. At least that's my personal philosophy. Like, you can't perfectly mimic every little movement. It's purely an act of expression. Through his dance, the character shows the world who he is, which transcends labels, skin, etc. To be clear, I do not believe we should all think we are automatically doing the right thing in all contexts. But within the context that I previously brought up here in this specific case, such as talking about labels and binaries, it can be a good thing that he chooses to accept who he is. If you look from the perspective that how he's being treated and label he was given is unjust. We have seen in real life the acceptance of labels that have been pushed upon you can be beneficial when you use your agency to turn it into something positive for you. Sometimes the victims of labels can take that anger and those feelings and use it in a way that makes the abusers seem justified. You absolutely should reject unjust labels that portray you in a negative light, but your reaction should be, to the best of your ability, to find the healthiest way to process that and prove those people wrong. Fighting fire with fire often doesn't help you or anyone else in the long run. In this case, the character's reaction was to try to appeal to people through dance, which, to kind of get more into what I was just saying, that's like a non aggressive way of defying people just calling him a monster. So, to wrap things up, I feel strongly that this video is meant to represent how illegitimate binaries of morality are forced on people by society, and that these create labels which misrepresent and dehumanize people. The Grinch in this story is a person unsure of who they are, trying to understand his sense of self in a society that is trying to tell him who he is and what he is destined to be. There are many different ways that you can view like how this plays out, but this is the general idea of what I think this story is about. And with that, that's the tale of my feelings towards Grinch's Ultimatum. There is definitely still more that could be said about the video and the very dense topics that I brought up. I'd love to hear any interpretations and thoughts that you all have. Whether you agree with me or not, please share as long as you're being respectful and not getting too intense with the things that I mentioned, which I said could be considered political and stuff like that. My channel is not a place that accepts hate and bigotry and all that stuff, so be respectful, please. And with that, I hope everyone has a great Christmas and happy holidays. Thank you very much for listening. Please check out my website in the description and some of my other content. I like to do analysis, reviews, and that type of thing about all types of topics surrounding media like anime, manga, video games, and stuff like that. So please stick around if that interests you. And thank you very much again.